American gods. Not Canadian gods, no. These are American, true blue American gods over here. Canadian gods would just be a book about Sum 41 and Billy Talent. Come, Shadow, we must be all aboard the ghost ship of cannibal rats. To be honest, a ghost ship of cannibal rats would not be an out-of-place thing in this book. That was a weird tangent. Sorry, I started speaking, then my brain took over. So I recently read American Gods, and I thought I would do a video that is predominantly going to be a review of American Gods, but I thought I would take the opportunity to also just talk about my experience with Neil Gaiman's writing up to this point, because I've been very on and off with his work that I've consumed. Neil Gaiman himself seems like a very nice man. I've seen a lot of stuff of him in interviews and giving out writing advice online. He seems like a very genuinely really cool guy. Neil Gaiman, the man, seems quite lovely, if I'm being honest, but I am talking specifically about his written works and my feelings about them, because they are mixed, somewhat mixed, like a lovely cocktail, like a pina colada. Yep, the most basic of cocktails. That's the one that I thought of there. Strawberry daiquiri. Should have said strawberry daiquiri. I love a strawberry daiquiri. Anyway, so before I actually go into the American Gods part of the review, I'm just gonna go through what I've consumed by Neil Gaiman up to the point, because I was a little apprehensive going into American Gods because of the previous stuff from Neil Gaiman that I'd read. And obviously he's a very popular, prevalent author, so you hear a lot of good things about him, and so there is an expectation set, which for me wasn't entirely met every time. The first Neil Gaiman book I read was Norse mythology, which is up on my shelves over there. I really liked Norse mythology. I thought that was a really fun read. I thought it gave a really nice, concise, fresh voice to these old tales. However, it feels difficult to make a judgment on Neil Gaiman off Norse mythology alone, because those tales do predate him by some time, and while I enjoyed the writing style with which Neil Gaiman put them down and collated them, it's hard to make a judge on him as a storyteller based on that alone. Similarly with Good Omens. Read Good Omens this year, absolutely loved Good Omens. That was a quality read, but it was a co-author joint between him and Terry Pratchett, and even they say in the little interview that they have at the back of the book that neither one of them can remember who wrote what bit of Good Omens, so not that there was any bit I didn't enjoy. It wasn't just like, this paragraph seems different to the previous paragraph. I bet Gaiman wrote this one. That didn't happen, but obviously because it's a co-authorship, it's again hard to judge entirely one author based off that. So while I did like both of those books, there was that voice in the back of my mind that's going, it's not a complete representation of Gaiman's work. And also I have to say, Neil Gaiman wrote that episode of Doctor Who where the TARDIS was a woman. I didn't really care for that episode, I have to be honest. I know a lot of people actually really like that episode, but it just wasn't for me. I thought, I don't think the TARDIS needed to be a woman. That also came in the middle of like a massive dip in the quality of Doctor Who's overall writing. In addition, last year I read Neverwhere, commonly lauded as one of Neil Gaiman's best. And I did a mini review for Neverwhere when I did my reviewing every book I read in 2020 video. I can't remember exactly where I put it on the tier list, but the more I think about Neverwhere, like looking back on it now, the less I feel I really got gripped by it. I really didn't get the hype surrounding it. I found the protagonist pretty bland, and he was just kind of going from thing to thing. In fact, most of the characters in Neverwhere I felt were fairly like one-dimensional, especially the girl who the protagonist starts out dating, because she is just so horrible, and we've seen from this guy's perspective that he's, a decent guy who has basic kindness and compassion for his fellow humans. And it's just like, how is this guy with this girl who is cartoonishly horrible? How is that a relationship that ever came about in the first place? And there were things I liked about Neverwhere. I enjoyed the crazy, whimsical world. I enjoyed that in the London below, everything had a counterpart, like the angel Islington being an actual angel. Lots of good stuff in there, but there's also a lot of stuff that for me it fell short on. And looking back on it now that it's been a while since I've read it, probably wouldn't reread it. When I think about it now, I didn't like it that much. So those are my thoughts on all the Gaiman that I've read up to this point, which brings me to American Gods. Now, I had seen the first couple episodes of the TV show American Gods a few years ago now, but then I just kind of stopped watching it. I think partially because I'd heard that later on it deviated from the book, and that Neil Gaiman himself was like unhappy with the direction that they were taking the show, which I think kind of just put me off continuing it, because I was like, well, why bother getting invested if it's gonna do that? But then I came across this in a secondhand bookstore, and since it was a lot cheaper than it would be at a regular retailer, I picked it up. I thought, why not give the book a go. If the reason I wasn't going to continue the show is because it deviated from the book, why not actually read the book, you know? So that's what I did, and that is all of that I've just said is why I was somewhat apprehensive to get into this. I really wasn't sure if I was going to like it or not, especially because it's such a thick book. I wasn't sure if it was going to be worth the time that it would take to read it. However, I have to say I was pleasantly surprised by this book and how much I actually did end up enjoying it. I enjoyed Shadow as the protagonist. I know I criticized the main guy in Neverwhere for just kind of being a guy who just goes with it, a character who felt like they lacked agency, and Shadow is also a character who just goes with it. But the thing about Shadow is he has no reason to do anything else. He is coming from a place where he has basically just lost everything that made his life, and so he sort of doesn't really have that much of a choice other than to tag along with Mr. Wednesday and just see what happens. While he does begin as a passive character, it makes sense for the things that he's gone through and the situation that he's in, and it makes him more compelling because you want him to take a more active role and you want him to become a bigger part of the narrative. And of course you feel sorry for him because of the things that he's gone through, and then the things that also start happening after that. I'm going non-spoilers, by the way, just in case that wasn't clear. Expect me to talk a lot about the thing and the situation where the something happened. Speaking of Mr. Wednesday, absolutely wonderful character, a great personality on the page. I very much enjoy his personality and the dynamic that emerges between him and Shadow, where Shadow doesn't really like him, but he doesn't have much of a choice but to be with him. And Mr. Wednesday has this sort of air of like a somewhat affectionate uncle, which is just not reciprocated by Shadow, which is fun to read about. There's also there's good humor in this book as well. The funniest parts come from just like little character things, really, as opposed to like outright jokes or banter in dialogue. But the vast majority of the characters in this book, especially the god characters, have really pronounced personalities and defined characters to them, and it just makes it all the more fun to meet all of these people and get to know how they all know each other and what is going to happen next. And now I've criticized books in the past for having slow or meandering plots and pacing. However, my problem is not with pacing itself. I don't mind a slow-paced book, and this actually is proof of that, because the slow and meandering pacing here really works for the story that is being told, whereas I felt like in something like The Wise Man's Fear, it felt like it was detracting from the narrative, whereas here it's enhancing it. A slow-paced book can be a compelling read, and here it always feels like we're building up to something despite the slow pacing. We know it's going to be a slow burn, but we always have that anticipation that there is something at the end of this. Whereas in Wise Man's Fear, it was like, here's a meander, and now we're back to the status quo. Nothing much has come of this. The meandering pacing definitely worked a lot better in this book than it did in some others that I've read. I've also read books that have fast paces where the fast pace doesn't work for them, where it makes it feel like there's too much happening at once and there's no room for anything to breathe. Like, in general, I prefer a fast-paced book to a slow-paced book, I think, but more so, the pacing should depend on the type of story that is being told. Anyway, that's my thoughts on pacing, I guess. Another thing that I enjoyed about this book is the world building itself in the way that the gods operate within America. I love the concept behind, because America is this melting pot that is founded on immigration, you have all these different beliefs from different cultures coming, and because the people believe in them, the gods then exist in America. But because there's been this generational divide between the original immigrants and the people who are currently living in America, you end up not with the gods themselves, but with believed versions of the gods who walk in that land. And they differ or become corrupted depending on the way in which people believe in them, compared to how people believed in them back in the homelands where they originated. And also the whole device of the fact that the gods only exist because people believe in them, and now they've got to fight so that people believe in them again, so that they don't die out. All of that, like the power deriving from belief stuff, that is really cool, and it is executed very well in this book. To us, another reason I liked how sort of slow and meandering this book was is because I was just enjoying being in the world. Like, I was taking my time reading this, in part because it's kind of a big book and it's a hefty goer. But I was just enjoying the various different parts of the book and like living in the world. Especially the Mike Ansel chapters where Shadow is being this Mike guy and he's just undercover living in this lakeside town. I really enjoyed those chapters just for the sort of the atmospheric nature that they had. And this book does a really good job creating a sense of atmosphere and a sense of build-up, despite being slow-paced as it is. Yeah, I just really enjoyed it, like getting to experience that town and the small town life. The copy becomes friends with his neighbours, learning all the people who know each other around this town, getting to see everything unfurl and unfold, and then getting to see how it actually, in the end of the book, all comes back together and connects. I just thoroughly enjoyed all of that. And as to the conclusion of everything, the conclusion of the main plot and the lakeside town plot and everything else, I found it really satisfying. I was very satisfied by the conclusion and the ending of this book. I will say, the copy that I have includes an American Gods short story at the end called The Monarch of the Glen, and I feel like that was necessary to like really be the clincher to a satisfying ending, because so much has happened by the time we get to the end, and there's just so much to comprehend, I guess. And given everything that Shadow's been through, when I was getting towards the end, I was like, it's gonna feel hard to give this a satisfying conclusion and wrap some of these storylines up neatly. But Neil Gaiman did it. Especially, one of my favourite scenes was very near to the end, where Shadow goes to Iceland and he meets someone there, and I really enjoyed the conversation that they have. And I'll leave it there for spoilers, but if you've read the book, you probably know what I'm referencing. And so all of that came together, and I really enjoyed the Monarch of the Glen short story at the end as well. That was like a very interesting continuation of the story, and it definitely felt, to me, it felt like it was actually necessary for the book to have a more definitive end than it did without it. But yeah, I came away from this book pretty happy that I'd read it. I'm not without criticism of this book. I still think there are certain parts that could be cut down, that could have been edited to be a little conciser. I'm still not entirely enthralled by Neil Gaiman's actual writing style, like just the way that he does prose. But even with that being said, I did enjoy this story, I enjoyed our main characters, I enjoyed getting to experience this tale, and I would probably say that American Gods is my favourite Neil Gaiman book that I've read. Actually, no, it's probably Good Omens, but this is my favourite just Neil Gaiman book. So I've definitely had my ups and downs in the Neil Gaiman works that I have consumed, and it was nice to go into this not knowing if it would be a hit or a miss, and discovering a hit. Okay, so I think that's what I have to say on Neil Gaiman and American Gods. Oh, also, I like this cover, especially for like a show-based book cover. I think this is one of the better ones. I enjoy the neon sign with the letters blinking out, so it also says, "Am I a God?" That's a very cool design choice. And yeah, that is pretty much all I have to say on American Gods and Neil Gaiman. My mixed thoughts on the author and my positive, mainly, thoughts on this book specifically. So that means it's the end of the review. Leave a comment down below if you agree with the things I said, or if you disagree, if you liked American Gods or if you didn't, what your general thoughts on Neil Gaiman as an author are. If you like this video, please leave it a like. If you want to see more from me, please do subscribe. Thank you all so much for watching this video, and as always, I will see you in my next one. Come, Shadow, we must be all aboard the ghost ship of cannibal rats.